Welcome to ProPEllant, a podcast for private equity operating partners and the leaders building the next generation of SaaS companies. Each episode features conversations with operating partners, investors, and experienced operators about how value is created inside software companies before a deal, during diligence, and after the investment closes. My name's Ken Lempit, president of Austin Lawrence Group, an advertising agency that specializes in SaaS go-to-market, and your host of the ProPEllant podcast. Our guest today is Pat Meegan, senior partner and pricing practice leader at Investor Group Services, a consulting firm that helps private equity and investor clients make better investment and strategic decisions. Welcome to the podcast, Pat.
Thanks, Ken. Great to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you here and to see you again in the podcast format. But before we get into our planned conversation for the episode, could you tell us some more about yourself and IGS?
Yes. So I am a senior partner leading the pricing team here at IGS. IGS has been around for over 25 years, do everything from due diligence, market diligence, and go-to-market and pricing work. So we're going to span the pre and post-close period of the hold, so kind of the whole life cycle. And my role there is to get in and figure out where monetization opportunities exist, and then help companies realize the EBITDA gains from those opportunities.
Which is really important, right? EBITDA gains mean valuation increase, right?
That's right.
That's what it's all about.
That's what it's all about.
And like digging into the company and its place in the PE ecosystem, it's kind of interesting because you're working with the PE firms both in the front end in diligence and post-close value creation. For listeners that may not know firms like yours exist, can you explain how consulting partners like IGS plug in to PE firms and what problems they're hired to solve?
Yes. So as you'd imagine, when a firm is going to buy a company, they want to make sure that the growth is real, and they want to make sure that the market has potential. This is an attractive asset, and oftentimes there's a third party that comes in to help those teams so that they have an objective look at it. Also, there's a lot of activity that happens around a deal, so the third parties can provide additional capacity there. But during diligence, is this company's growth real? How attractive is the market? What are the challenges? What are the risks? Obviously, things like identifying technological AI displacement risks, things like that. And then after the deal closes, there's a host of things that come up. And often these kind of value creation levers can be evaluated to some extent before the acquisition. But after the acquisition, the focus really is how do we accelerate growth, and what are the big buckets of opportunity, and how do we go attack them during the hold period. And so that's where a firm like IGS has capability to assess the sales team and assess the comp and quota structure and the pricing and all those things, and breaking it down into the different areas and then applying expertise to it to then accelerate that growth.
Yeah, I mean, even successful SaaS operators, SaaS founders, they have blind spots, right? Or they've attempted things like a pricing change, pricing strategy, only to get some bruises as a result. So they might be reticent without greater support to take on these challenges, either for the first time or again. Has that something you've seen in the engagements you've worked in?
Yeah, I mean, it's always fascinating to work with founders and to see the things that they're incredible at, and then also, just being human, there are things that their backgrounds or their strengths may not reside. And we've seen some founders that are fantastic at monetization and pricing. What's more common though is they tend to be fantastic at the product and the selling part of it. So when you think about monetization, there's often latent opportunities like the legacy deals, the first logos they got. How do you better monetize the install base, or having a strategy around capturing more of the value through packaging, or looking at changes to the product over time, and maybe we should revisit the pricing model and the pricing metrics. So what often happens in the challenging cases is thinking about price as kind of just the price point and changing that, a price hike. There are often many other levers that should be considered to improve the monetization of the product.
Yeah, and I want to dig in a little on the pricing opportunities. And careful listeners will remember that we had you on SaaS Backwards, our other podcast, in January of 2024. And we did a pretty deep dive for that format on pricing strategy and SaaS. But maybe now from where you sit working closely with PE value creation teams, what's changed the most in pricing conversations over the last year? And we probably should dig in a little bit about, what the impact of AI is having on pricing as well.
Yeah, you hit topic number one. It is the impact of AI. And so, you as you would expect, and as we've seen, technology companies are focusing on identifying ways to bring in AI, augment their product, or of course you have AI native products as well. So across that landscape, the question of not just what do we do from satisfying our user needs with the AI capabilities, but then how do we monetize it becomes an important part of that question. Because if you think about traditional SaaS, you have next to no marginal cost for each additional user or use case. In most instances with AI, it brings marginal cost. And so it forces a discussion around, okay, how do we ensure that our margins can be recouped? But then a bigger question is, that's kind of the floor question. How do we make sure that we can maintain margin? But the ceiling really is, how much more value does this provide? How do we align the value of this AI capability to the monetization model, the pricing metrics, the packaging? And there's a whole discussion to be considered around that where, should this be, if you're an existing product, should this be an add-on or should it augment an existing package? Should it be its own premium package? Should you have a model that's based on, seats anymore? Does that fit at all? Or should we be thinking about something that has some of the, like a credits type system that allows you to be flexible across different agents? So those questions are pushing teams to think differently, and some exciting things are coming out of it.
Yeah, the credits thing is really where we have to train like the entire market, that there's a consumption cost because they've not had that experience in
Yeah.
vendor supplied software, right? I imagine
Mhm.
that's one of the big hurdles to jump for companies that are like bolting on new capabilities that do create marginal costs to them.
Mhm. That's right. And then also, just to make it more complex, if you have multiple agents, they could have different value and different cost and different consumption of compute. And so you have to think about those things. How do I keep my model from becoming this long list of different variables and nickel and diming the buyers? Often a credit system can allow for more of that variable nature of the consumption to be easy to buy and predictable to buy. So if you think about, you could use an example of like going to a fair where you buy, a block of 20 tickets. You might be doing skee ball that takes a ticket or two, or one of the teacup rides that takes five. You have to kind of set some of the tiering in there, and the way that you're going to allow the buyer to buy, but then make it easy for them to use across the agents that they value.
Yeah, I imagine it's going to take some time for the best practices to really emerge and be tested on how to package the tickets, right? The tokens,
Mhm.
and how to train users and make them feel good about the consumption of that resource, right? Because again, right now, if I get on most of my software products like Microsoft Office, it's, spell check your heart out, right? But on some of these other products like the CRMs, they're beginning to put intelligence in that do require credits. And it's a little bit of a black box right now, I think.
Yeah, you're right, but it's also kind of an exciting space to invent and try things, and teams that are putting the thought into it are finding ways that work. Mark Benioff mentioned at Dreamforce, he's the leader of Salesforce, of course. He talked about how there's extreme partnership is required as you think about this AI world and these models, because it's not like it's been figured out, and people are trying things and they're testing and learning, but no one's got it figured out. I think his point is like, you need to be thinking about this, you need to be putting the work into it versus kind of saying, we're going to leave our current model and just try to get more volume on the platform.
Yeah, I love that idea of extreme partnership. I mean, it's sort of saying to your customers and prospects, let's go on this journey together. Let's build
Mhm.
a reasonable future that you can afford and we can afford to deliver for you, right? It's kind of a nice approach. And so much in AI seems like this inevitable calamity, and it might be nice for it to be, a shared build of a future, right? So it's kind of a cool way to
Yeah.
think about it. I want to move on a little bit. One of the themes in our prep call was that operating partners, in your experience, are still thinking about the product and monetization as kind of two separate worlds and conversations. And as we sort of hinted at just now, AI kind of breaks down that barrier, right? That approach sort of falls apart. So why do SaaS companies need to design pricing and packaging at the same time as they design the product itself? I think that's the first time I've heard that.
Yeah, well, there's been some dialogue in the pricing world about this for a while, but what's great about AI is it highlights the need more than ever. And if you think about it, the reason to build a product is so that you can increase the value to your buyer. I mean, setting aside things like fixing bugs, if you're going to build a product, it needs to add value. So the question is, how does it fit into the monetization plan you have? Is it something where you can charge additionally for it? Does it increase the value of what you already have in some distinct way? Because you're going to be adding cost. And so the question becomes far more poignant where you're saying, hey, if we're going to add this cost and users are going to be able to incur it, we need to be able to get more for this. And so what's great about it is the ideal is when you're early in the process, you're thinking about, okay, what are the value drivers here and how does this augment the value we can deliver to our existing or new customers? So then it starts to force a conversation on, okay, well, how are we going to sell this? And what are the things we need to either understand so we can build it the right way, or that we need to be thinking about in terms of our model so that at launch, either to existing or new customers, we need to position it in a new way. And kind of to your point that you made earlier about the partnership, is that some of these things are seismic shifts enough that it changes that selling conversation even with existing customers. Hey, that this is a different product. We're going in a different direction. The old ways we've done things need to change. And so you have this conversation that's focused around value and the buyer's needs that's really healthy. And so the question is, hey, how do you do that in a way that you can share the additional value that you're generating appropriately?
It may have been a best practice before, but it sounds like having the sellers, like sales leadership involved in these conversations early on is going to be important. Am I kind of reading that right?
Oh, I think that makes a lot of sense, right? So anytime you have siloing across the organization, you're going to miss out on some things, but especially when sales is saying, okay, how are we going to take this to the market? What do we know? And obviously there's a role of research because your sales team has, phenomenal contact with the customers and prospects they're talking to, but they aren't talking to the whole market. And for a new need set that you're addressing with an offering, you may need to do some deep dives with customers or prospects and understand some of the unique value of what you're bringing. But the sales team plays a huge role on, how does this fit into the story they're going to be telling, and from the reactions they get from buyers, and they know a lot about what's valued and what's not, and so they play a really good role as a check in that process.
Yeah, that's cool. I think it's an opportunity also then within the organization, right, to get alignment around the new product and, probably energize your whole organization as you move into, a new technology delivery model.
Years ago, I was a sales rep and then later a sales strategy leader. And I remember in the product development process, it started to pull sales in, and the conversations that we had were really revealing in terms of where the gaps were in the process, and also what are the things we need to be thinking about several months out before you get to GA on these kinds of things. And everybody benefited from the push and pull of the different functions discussing this launch.
I want to move on to this value creation, SaaS value model,
Mhm.
and this traditional model that we've had, the seat-based pricing. You mentioned it
Mhm.
before, really doesn't fit too well in an AI heavy or AI native product offer. And I think that investors are probably just starting to grapple with this, right? They're beginning, they see the market threat, but I think they're now looking at the value model, valuation, pricing. What are the big mistakes you're seeing early on here when companies are trying to price the AI features? And how does that roll up to the investing community?
Yeah, and it's an important question. So, one of the biggest misses is just, I would say, generically, not enough time spent thought about the pricing and the pricing strategy and the model. And that's something that within the pricing community, people have been saying forever. What's exciting is that it's getting more traction these days. So, if you think about, oftentimes it's tempting to just say, hey, we're not going to disrupt our model. We're going to try to kind of make this just kind of a nominal adjustment. But the companies that do well in these types of launches are kind of breaking it back down to the basics and saying, should we be thinking about, a wholesale change to our pricing model. And so if you think about seats are, a fixed point. They don't vary over time. Oftentimes it's a user basis, but users could have widely variable consumption of compute based on their usage. And so you could easily be pricing some companies out, low usage companies would be priced out of the market for what you're offering with a fixed rate in a seats model. And those that would be using a lot of it are often underpriced, and you're missing out on the monetization opportunity. And so we're seeing models that come through where you have, say, a hybrid approach where you have some seats. In some cases, seats still make sense. Often when you can't draw a clear line between what the AI does in terms of driving an outcome, there are examples out there, like intercom, where you have this number of resolutions. It's really clean, it's nice, but not all products do that. And so they have to think about, okay, well, maybe there is a role for seats, but there's a variable or token element or a credit element that sits on top of that license, and that captures some of the upside of the requirements based off of how much is consumed. So, getting creative there, thinking about different models, looking at what others are doing, all those practices end up becoming useful, because while you don't have like a one standard way to do it, it's also important here is that not all AI inclusions in a product behave the same way. It all depends on the type of SaaS you have and the type of AI you have to be able to think through what fits in this case. And then does it align with the value we're delivering? Does it impinge on adoption? You certainly don't want to be doing that you're kind of tripping up the adoption of your AI. And so there's some balances that you have to work through to get to the right model.
As you're speaking, I was thinking about, we keep looking at like the pitfalls here. Like it's just human nature, I guess, not just in
Hmm.
this conversation, but founders that I speak with either as prospects for our business or, on our other podcast or, even clients, they're looking at it almost the downside. But I think there might be an upside here too, right? In terms of the monetization, as we've talked about, and therefore expanding actually the enterprise value of these companies. Can you talk briefly to that?
Yeah, if you think about what an agent can do versus traditional SaaS, there are opportunities that a buyer has to be able to solve problems in a better way. And so if you think about that and say, hey, this is actually generating value incrementally and potentially more so than what the platform did before, that's where a lot of this stems from. It's not just kind of this cute thing that we're tacking on that says AI. It's something that enables outcomes in a better way, in a faster way, and can have implications across the organization in terms of where they put human resourcing as well. And so this is part of what the diagnosis is for a company, is to say, well, how does this generate value? Because oftentimes, and we've worked with organizations where they're building out AI that trumps what they used to provide just in SaaS form, right? And so it's a miss to not claim some of that value via pricing.
Yeah, so that is both a pricing exercise and a customer education
That's
exercise.
right.
Have to train them almost on how to use the product differently to get that extra value so that it's worth paying for.
Yeah, and then the sales team is charged with telling that story and helping the buyers and prospects to understand the value they're going to get from that. So that's, again, goes back to that point of having them included in how they're going to position it.
I do want to, as we kind of land the episode, sort of tell the cautionary tale also here. So when you step into portfolio companies after a deal closes, are there some common monetization or pricing issues that just seem to be pervasive or just very frequent? And perhaps highlighting those might help listeners who are looking at deals, try and see if those things exist in these potential investments.
Yeah. So one of the first ones that comes up is that pricing hasn't been touched in years. So, often there are escalators included in contracts. It's a really basic one, but whether that's tracking to just kind of some flat rate, or if you've been making significant improvements to your product over the time, but you're not capturing much of that value through changes to either the price levels or the pricing model, that's one of the big ones that we see. The other part is one that I mentioned briefly earlier, is you may be taking prices up for those who are new coming in the door, but you aren't doing anything to strategically increase the monetization of the install base. And there's ways to do that poorly and ways to do it effectively. It isn't just about just ratcheting up prices ham-handedly. There are many cases that we've seen of others doing that and it doesn't tend to work well. But if you think about it from a segmented and differentiated perspective in terms of, what are the churn risks and what are the indicators we have of strong adoption and satisfaction, how do I have a phased and piloted approach to make sure it works really well? You can have a lot of EBITDA gains from improving the monetization of your base. The other part too is, aggressive product roadmaps, but you're leaving a lot of that value from being considered. It's just rolling right into your packaging, and you're not thinking about how much additional value it's bringing, and or you're not to over time looking at your packaging and say maybe we should rethink this, start again from the drawing board and rethink our packaging, especially when you're bringing in agentic capabilities or AI in some form, be it whatever form of AI that you be bringing in the product, should be asking the questions, how should we think differently about our pricing and packaging model?
So, kind of to sum it up, if you haven't touched it in a while, regardless of where you're looking at the company, whether it's pricing for new customers, pricing for existing customers, pricing for kind of foundational capabilities you're adding, or if you're adding AI and not thinking through the pricing implications, there's at least four places where during diligence, someone might look and ask the questions, hey, what's the thinking on pricing here, right?
That's right.
Well, and I think that's a great place to land our episode. Pat, Meegan, thank you so much for being on the ProPEllant podcast. If our listeners want to reach you, how can they do that?
Yeah, you can go on to igsinsights.com, or you can look me up on LinkedIn.
Easy as that. And if people want to reach me, I'm on LinkedIn/in/Ken Lempit. My advertising and SaaS go-to-market agency is Austin Lawrence. We're at austinlawrence.com. And the ProPEllant podcast is being distributed wherever podcasts are offered and as well on YouTube. So, Pat Meegan, IGS Insights, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Ken. It's a pleasure.